All right, I'll kick us off since I know people will be coming in. So, hi everyone, welcome. We're super excited to have this panel today and this topic. So, we're going to be having some community members from Project FoundED. For folks not joining, I see a lot of FoundED members, which is exciting. Hey everyone. For everyone who is not familiar with Project FoundED, we're a community of EdTech founders dedicated to the betterment of our industry through the use of collective voice and data. We're here to, deliver equitable learning outcomes for all learners, working on it together, and we support founders in, all aspects of delivery at that goal. And put this in the chat box, but you can learn more and sign up at projectfounded.org. Now going into today's event, again, with our wonderful community members, we're going to be talking about, the barriers in our industry and how founders can overcome them. So we're going to get into some of the practical nitty gritty from some founders and executives. Without further ado, I'll pass this on to Sandro, our Executive Director at FoundED, to introduce himself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Sandro. As Sophie said, I co-founded Project FoundED with all of those lofty goals that Sophie mentioned. Happy to have everybody here. And thank you so much to our panelists for joining us. I think anybody that's attending is attending because you guys are on the bill. So why don't we just do very short introductions? Most folks probably know who you are. So why don't we go just name and your title at the company you're at. Why don't we start with you, Amanda?
Sorry, I'm Amanda DoAmaral. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Fiveable.
Mike?
Hi, y'all. Mike Soldan. I'm the Chief Experience Officer at Shmoop.
Yeah.
And hey, I'm Dan Carroll, co-founder, Chief Product Officer at Clever.
Thanks, guys, for being here and for being part of the FoundED community generally. I think this panel really came about from discussions within the community. And Mike, a discussion you and I had specifically about what we felt some barriers to innovating within EdTech is, how difficult it is to make something meaningful match up with something that can be successful in this market. And we had a very robust discussion about middlemen in EdTech that could pose barriers to innovation. So I'll ask you to start off, what did you mean by middlemen in education, and what are the best ways to overcome those challenges?
Yeah, thanks, Sandro. So when I stumbled into Project FoundED, it was actually at a pretty frustrating time for me. About 18 months ago, Shmoop was looking to roll out one of our newest products that's called the Shmoop Heartbeat, that really focuses on the whole child and how non-academics can impact academics and the student's ability to perform, which is a really unique concept. Lots of great research and things like that exist around it, but we wanted to take action on that. And what I was finding as we were looking to gain credibility for the product, it was actually rather difficult. A lot of organizations already exist in the space that start with really strong intentions, even what all of us have on the phone here for Project FoundED. It's how do you help the kids? How do we move EdTech forward? How do we make it more beneficial for students and their learning? But what happens over time as these bodies start to serve schools, districts, states, whatever they may be, there's a tendency for them to become almost self-serving, these certifying bodies. And so it can be very frustrating when you're working with them, knowing that the original intent was, hey, if you can certify or help me prove that the Shmoop Heartbeat is amazing for students in the way that I want to, then we can go impact student lives together. But what's happened in the space is that our teachers, our schools, our districts, they need help from organizations to show that there are good tools and products. And so there's a lot of leaning on some of these middlemen, these certifying bodies that unfortunately have gotten so far away from impact on the student and have become very focused on rubrics and things like that, almost like another RFP, unfortunately. And it can be a very difficult thing to do. We're going to talk a lot today about how to work around that and just the general notion of continuing to try. And that's really how we've done that at the Shmoop Heartbeat. We just kept looking for more organizations and more forward-looking and open-minded research and efficacy-based middlemen and certifying bodies. But that's really kind of how it kicked off. So when I found Project FoundED, Sandro, you, and Sophie, it's cool to have a group of an organization that can understand what that pain is and talk about how to work in and around that reality. And I think Dan and Amanda have some cool comments on it later too.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, and Dan and Amanda jump in if you'd like, but it's a problem that I think is endemic to the space, probably any space, but as for those of us, and most of the folks in our audience are in the education space too, it's one that doesn't move very swiftly. And so it can be a problem that's endemic to the space. We're waiting for new certifying bodies to come out to be able to certify my product so then I can go sell the product. While meanwhile, they're asking for the same certifications that were already in place, before, technology was really in the classroom, so it's sort of slow moving. So I think it's important, it's incumbent on us. I think one of our primary principles at FoundED, and the reason we support EdTech entrepreneurs generally, is because we really have a unique view into most of the problems within education technology. I'm not going to say education generally because we don't, but the challenges in education technology, right? The barriers to successfully implementing within a classroom and getting results, the challenges to selling into the industry to be able to do that at all, the challenges to raising money, all of these things that we see are unique to the entrepreneur experience. And so I think it's incumbent on us to really be the ones to raise up these problems so that we start convening folks that have bigger platforms and deeper pockets than us to start coming up with solutions. And that sort of leads into the next topic that I was going to move into. And of course they all sort of interconnect, so we'll be back to it in a second. But Dan, you've talked specifically about these two different conversations that are happening simultaneously, right? There's this sort of larger, higher level education/policy conversation. And then there's the very sort of immediate entrepreneurship, I need to do this now, or my users need this now kind of conversations. And they can be at odds. So what advice do you have for entrepreneurs, particularly maybe in the early stages, about how to deal with the conversations that are happening?
Yeah, thanks for giving me an opportunity to talk to this, Sandro. So, the idea that education isn't the most innovation-friendly sector isn't a new one. There's lots of folks who identified a lot of challenges. Mike identified gatekeepers or certification bodies as being a barrier to innovation. At Clever, we've thought a lot about data integration and procurement as two big challenges we think about. And I'm sure Amanda has a bunch that she could talk about at Fiveable as well. So there's a bunch of known challenges. And I think that what I think is really interesting, and somebody's gonna get confusing, I got confused by this as an early stage entrepreneur, is like, how are we approaching these challenges? One is like at a systemic way. Like, we are going to change the system so this challenge no longer exists. We are going to reform procurement laws, or we are going to develop new EdTech standards to improve data integration. Like, there are like systemic solutions that will remove this challenge from the system entirely. And those are amazing. And we should pour tons of philanthropic dollars and energy, and government, you should lobby government to remove these barriers. Like, that's really, really important. But those solutions are going to take, and I've been now in EdTech for over a decade, so I can see this, like, sometimes it takes a decade to change the system and to remove that kind of barrier. And we need to do that work. Like, we need people who are like, I'm in it for a decade and I'm gonna do that work. Now, let's think about if you're an early stage entrepreneur though, your company is going to die. You are gonna wither on the wither on the vine before the systemic problem can get fixed. And so if you are an early stage entrepreneur and you're like, I'm frustrated with data integration, inventing a new open standard and getting the country to adopt it is not going to be the way that you're going to solve that problem for yourself. And so there needs to be, like, while we need to do this long-term, policy work, we also need to, as an entrepreneur, say, like, what can I do within the constraints of the current system? What is the sort of hack or workaround or way that I can avoid getting stuck in this by this barrier? And we need to be really creative about that in education, and we need to take agency. And if you're like an earliest stage entrepreneur, it's like, maybe you and a co-founder, probably you should only be thinking about that entrepreneurial solution, how to get past the barrier tomorrow. Now, if your company can get to some scale, I feel really lucky that Clever's been able to get to that scale. We're now able to participate in both avenues. We're able to both kind of work around the problem in an immediate way, and we're able to advocate for longer term solutions and join coalitions and work on standards and policies and that kind of a thing. And I feel really grateful that we're now able to kind of take the long view as well as the short view. But let me tell you, when we were getting started, we did not take the long view at all. We said, there's a problem, we need a solution tomorrow. What is the crazy way that we can, get it out of the way? And I'm sure it will come up. I hope we get a chance to talk about some of those really specific examples throughout the course of this conversation.
I think like beyond that too, part of what we think about a lot is, and I was a teacher before Fiveable. At my school, I felt like the school was moving so slowly, but my students needed whatever it was like tomorrow, right? Like, and at my school, sometimes it was simple as like, it was too hot in my portable classroom. We need we need fans. I cannot be in this classroom. Or like, we don't have computers. We literally had like a Chromebook cart that I couldn't get into my portable because I had no ramp, which like obvious ADA violations, but like that aside, I still couldn't get computers. So the problem that I was really frustrated by as a teacher was like the students only have ninth grade once. They got one shot at this year. Like they only have this 10th grade AP world class once. Yeah, the school needs to get better textbooks and we need all these things, but that's not going to happen this year. And now we're basically saying, well, like tough to the kids, like you now don't have this thing that you need, which then we know like how much that impacts them down the road. And so for us, it's just been like, we've been taking obviously the entrepreneurship side of it, not the policy side, but we've gone in a way that's like, what if we just gave students the power to go around that? Like my theory is sort of like, the systems themselves are going to protect these inequities. And so the change has to sort of come from outside of it. And I think we see the same thing happen with communities online in, investing, in politics and in finance and a lot of other spaces. And so thinking about like with education, it's like, how do you just give teachers the power to move around the system? How do you just give students the power to move around the system? Or admin, like whatever group that you're like working on, it's like, it's so frustrating to be in it and be just, I think that's what burnout is, right? Like when you're just like so passionate and you're like stuck. And so I think that's kind of how we've looked at it, is just like, what if we just built a network that students could just go to each other and forget the rest of it?
Yeah, we call this at Shmoop, Sandro, we call this our go-to-market motion. And my advice for everybody on the phone that's an early stage founder or trying to make a pivot or chasing that, that big kind of impact dream that Amanda's talking about. I think everybody on this call is here for students, which is really an amazing thing. You need to be thinking about that go-to-market motion while you're building your product or your solution or your program or whatever it is, and find that way through. There is a way through, whether it's different funding types or whether, like Amanda's reality is community, which is really amazing. That there's ways through it. So make sure that you're thinking about that go-to-market motion when you're building your product, because your product needs to be able to serve it. We had really interesting conversations in the early days of building the Shmoop Heartbeat on if we should make it a direct-to-consumer product, meaning we sell it straight to parents or give it to parents so that they can help their kids in their home. And then we realized our reach, it would be too difficult to build that kind of digital reach to do that. And our best impact is our amazing sellers that we already have in the field talking to districts. So that changes how you build your product and who's going to use it and how it's adopted and implemented. So it's really important to think about that while you're chasing the dream of the actual product or tool itself.
Just to build on what Mike just said, one way I think about this often when we build new products at Clever is like, how quick is our feedback loop on this new product? And despite like knowing this and probably talking about tight feedback loops all the time at panels, I have made this mistake multiple times. I have built products and the feedback loop is a year. Like we build the product over the summer, we try to sell it to districts over the course of a year. We don't actually know if they're going to buy it or not. We've launched it in June and we won't know if they actually buy it or not until June of the next year. And that we've wasted millions of dollars because if you build a product and it's a 1-year feedback loop, no one can afford to iterate on that at that timeline. So you need to find a way to make your feedback loop a month. Maybe you can make it a day. If you can make it, an hour, now you're going to have success because you will know if you're on track or off track. And community or an existing relationship with buyers are ways you can get that hour by hour feedback loop and actually build successful things.
it strikes me that the conversation that we were having, what you had just said originally, Dan, about these competing forces, and what Amanda, you were saying about, what your students need today versus what you need to do for your business, is the same sort of conversation, right? You and I have talked in the past about, what your students, what your community needs, what they're telling you need, and what you can build for them, and what maybe investors and the ecosystem would like to see from your business. Talk a little bit about where, that gap and how you overcame that.
It's interesting because it's the things that matter to students right now are like the structures that are currently in place. So if you ask any high school student what they're stressed about, it's college, SATs, APs, it's this whole like series of things that like, should all those come crashing down? Maybe. I don't know. Will they? I don't know. But a lot of times in tech, there's this theory, there's these like, college is unnecessary, right? That's a prevailing thing right now. Or SATs are on their way out because they're optional. But for students, optional doesn't mean that they shouldn't do it. It means like, I can still do it and I need to do it because I need to get into college. And so there's a huge difference between what I see conversations happening in tech and with investors, how they're thinking about what the future looks like, because they're very futuristic, which is good, and what's actually happening like on the ground. And that's something that's been really challenging for us because, I don't want to bet on the SATs. You know what I mean? Like, that's not something I want to like throw everything I have behind. But at the same time, like when I talk about like the students only have 10th grade once, like this is when they have to this is the game that they have to play. I can't just like say to a kid, like, you don't need that, when they do need that. And so we have to find some way to help them like play the game that they have to right now. But we are also trying to build the structures to adapt and to put pressure on the system to then change. And it's really challenging to come up against that, because it is like, it's something I wrestle with a lot of like, how, like, do I even think that students should go to college? I don't know, but I'm sitting on all my debt too, but here I am like helping students go to college. And so I think it's just about teaching students about different choices and different opportunities, and remaining flexible in like the ways that you build those solutions.
Another important thing that we've talked about as a group before here, Sandro, and I think we'll talk about this more in a little bit, but it sounds cliche to say because everyone's heard the term, but user-centered design and user experience design. But there's a difference between doing a couple interviews and going out and building something because you're obsessed with the tech or you think it's going to revolutionize the education system, and really empathizing with the users. And Amanda's commentary is powerful in this and other settings because it's purely driven from empathy. So if you can put yourself in the position of a teacher or put yourself in the position of a student, and you really believe that they will use it and that it will benefit them and that it is usable for them in their current reality, that's how you can start to introduce innovation. And that's a really, really important concept. I've mentioned this before, but at really large events, pre-COVID, the ISTEs of the world, it concerns me how many widgets there are, how many, hundreds of thousands of vendor booths, and we've got people that are betting their lives on a widget in the classroom. And the question you've got to ask yourself is, do you expect a teacher to use 55 widgets in a single day? And the answer is, of course not. And so starting from that place of empathy that Amanda's talking about, thinking about the teacher, thinking about the student, it will help you make better decisions earlier in what your tools and your development are going to be.
Yeah, I want to make this really, really tangible for founders listening. So, something I said often is like, a really good investor, they live in the future. Like, if you're a great investor, you're living 10 years into the future. And that's great. Like, if you're living 10 years into the future, you can see trends and extrapolate them out and make great bets on what companies might really be, successful 10 years out. But your users, they live in the present. And as an entrepreneur, you need to bridge these two worlds. You need to meet your users where they are. For Clever, that was and continues to be helping kids log in, like helping teachers deal with like, I can't type in my username and password. But investors, like, they're not thinking about like the kid that can't log in. Like, they're thinking about like what life looks like when there are 50,000 widgets flying around a school district. And it was so disconcerting for me in the early days of Clever. Like, I just wanted to talk about logins, the problem that I'd personally seen and faced and wanted to solve. But like, I talked to an EdTech thought leader and they'd be like, well, are you going to enable, bi-directional data flows from any application to any application to enable hyper-personalization and, like individual diplomas or whatever. And I'm like, no, I mean, but then I learned to say like, yeah, like once we can solve this login problem, we will have the traction and the momentum to solve these problems that are on the horizon. So yeah, we will do that. And like being able to speak to both languages, I was talking with Amanda and Mike that like when we go into fundraising mode, I actually like can't like do my normal thing of like reading support tickets and talking to users because I need to pull myself out of reality and into the future so I can kind of like live in the future with the investors and talk about how things will be in 10 years. And then like once the fundraising is all finished, like then I can go back to reality and think about like what's going on in classrooms and how do we get to that future. It's really two completely different modes of thinking, and being able to switch between them, I think is a really powerful skill you can build as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, that I just have to repeat what Dan said there in Shmoop terms and in Mike terms too, that find your concrete problem and solve that concrete problem that is happening in a classroom for a student or for an educator today. And then think about what your roadmap is. For us, a really interesting example, to use a really hot topic, this is the whole artificial intelligence machine learning concept. So, we ask a lot of questions of students in Heartbeat. We have more than 100,000 questions answered in the last 5 months inside the tool. And the question that I get from VCs all day long and from investors and from board and things like that are, when are you going to overlay this with machine learning? And the reality is that that's not really going to help the student today. Yeah, can we get to higher levels of precision? Definitely. But what we need is to get this in the hands of more kids, to get them the information, the insights and actions that we provide from it. Now, to Dan's point, when we have those conversations, you got to be ready to give a yes, and when that's going to happen and how it's going to look, and when you're going to bring those machine learning engineers in to look at those data sets and build for it. But it's a fine line between I'm creating a difference that an educator finds valuable today, and I can have this high level pitch about future tech or future fundraising.
Those are all good points, and it's a good time for me to get on my soapbox about investors a little bit too. One of the things that I think we talk about a lot, we get involved with all sorts of events in EdTech, is entrepreneurs not necessarily complaining, but just really speaking their truth about how hard it is to fundraise in the space, how difficult it is to put it together, et cetera, et cetera. And I want to make sure that I bring up the stories that I've collected over the last year creating Project FoundED. Is one of the things we've realized is that investors, nobody really in the education technology ecosystem is a bad actor. The ecosystem generally is slow and old in places, but everybody's doing what they need to be doing, and we're glad they're doing it in education, right? We need VC money in education for it to work properly and to create innovative new products. There's just not enough of it, and that's the main problem. And so in early stages in particular, there's probably not a lot of opportunities to do some fundraising, but I don't really think they're bad actors. Recognizing, of course, that you guys are already at tables with investors, you guys have already taken money from investors. Looking back, or from your standpoint now, what advice would you give to entrepreneurs generally, and maybe specifically early stage entrepreneurs that are trying to plan on how and when to do fundraising for their fledgling businesses?
Maybe I'll go first here, Sandro. So the first one's a really cliche answer, and it's going to be, this is the same in or outside of EdTech for every entrepreneur. You're going to get a lot more no's than you ever realized or that anyone ever talks about. It's a long, painful journey. So just know that's part of it, and it's not the end of the world, and it doesn't necessarily indicate the potential for success of your product or your idea or your process or your motion. So get ready for some of those no's and just keep grinding. I think of the millions of VC pitches I've done both in and out of the public sector EdTech space, they get better with each one. You'll refine them more and more. One of my biggest pieces of advice would be to stay focused on your core value proposition. I would give a ton of Clever success outside of Dan and his team and other co-founders, but their mission of just focusing on the login is so brilliant. And I think, being a vendor that's actually a partner with Clever as well, making that clear to me to want to partner with Clever was probably some of the commercial success that they've had as well. So stay crystal clear on what that original value proposition is, and don't necessarily get lost in all those features and whatever they may be. be able to pave that 5 or 10 year roadmap and play to some of the technology questions and some of the innovation questions that you've got, but make that value proposition clear. Really think everyone knows Clever on this call. So think about what Dan mentioned, which was there was a major problem with getting kids logged into to applications. And it was that simple. And then he's been able to add features and other data feeds and things like that to it. But there's one of those for everybody. So be clear with that and be ready for more no's than you've ever heard talked about.
I would say too that something that I think that we're sort of trying to get my team on board with this too, is that in EdTech, and maybe this is true in every space, but in this space in particular, there are a lot of problems to solve. And you have to, like, as part of that, you have to be clear on which ones you are working on and which ones you're not. And that's something that, like, sometimes we get feedback from an investor, from a student, from a teacher. You know, there's all kinds of, oh, what if you guys did this? What if you started doing this? And when you're pitching and getting a lot of no's, it's very easy to find yourself like hearing one person's feedback and then wanting to change the entire direction of the company. Like, don't do that. You have to get really clear on the one you want to do, but also the ones you don't want to do. And it's not that it's hard, because it's like sometimes people will say, like, you know, there's a lot of problems for teachers, for example, that Fiveable is not solving. Those should be solved. Someone needs to solve those problems. And I'm happy to, like, support that founder in their journey, but I'm not that person. That's not the problem that I'm solving. And getting good at like we just started a list internally, just so that the team knows, like, these are the businesses that we're not building. These probably should exist and someone will do them, and maybe one of you will do them, but this is not our decision. Like, we've chosen our path here.
That's such a good advice. And no investor is, if you know, you pitch doing X and the investor says, well, have you thought about doing Y? I'd be really interested in Y. They're not going to invest in you if you say, all of a sudden, I'm going to do Y. Like, what they're going to invest in you is if you have conviction. If you're like, X is so important, like, we are going to solve X no matter what. If you're not on board with us solving X, that's okay. We'll go find another investor who is. Like, that conviction is what gets investors excited, not a founder who's kind of wavering or pivoting. So find a problem that you have that conviction about. You know, I'm a lunatic, right, who has that much conviction about students being able to log into stuff. I don't know why that became the thing I wanted to devote my life to, but it feels right. And find your problem that you want to devote your life to at the same amount of rigor. And then the other thing I'd say is, if you're an EdTech founder going into the fundraising circle, is find some peer mentorship. You know, find a company that's not competitive, where you want them to succeed, they want you to succeed, that's maybe gone through a fundraising process recently. You could definitely find someone like that in the FoundED community, and trade notes. You know, like, what is this investor like? Like, what are they looking for? Having that kind of like really close, confidential peer support is so valuable. I'd also say, and it pains me that we should say this, but like, if you're a female founder, I would find that kind of peer who's female, because you'll probably have a different experience than, you know, a male founder. Or if you're a founder of color, it might be really helpful just to be able to trade notes and have kind of support in that way. And of course, you know, you can have more than one mentor and reach out to lots of folks. But, you know, fundraising, the dynamics change every few months, and what would have been an impossible deal 6 months ago might be a possible deal now. So getting kind of, you know, real great feedback on where the market's at from a peer or from past investors is just so critical, both for your sanity and also for strategic reasons.
Yeah, spend some time looking at the portfolios too. It's been really interesting. You'll see themes in the types of products, you know, applications, problems that a funder portfolio is trying to solve, even beyond just the financials of any deal that's happened. And almost all of them are public. You can find invested in companies and portfolios all over. And I think it'll give you a good, you know, direction on if this is something, if I'm solving a problem that they may be interested in or not.
All good advice. And I think that we're going to open it up to questions in a minute. But just to say that one of the reasons we started Project FoundED is all of the reasons you guys are just mentioning. We need, as founders, sort of additional support that is specific to education technology, because of all the problems we're raising, or the opportunities, right? There's not a ton of investors. So the advice that I would give is double down on everything that everyone said already about finding mentorship and trading notes and looking at portfolios, but also just figure out how to mentally just bring down that stress around fundraising, because it is such a hard thing that you need to make it sort of like a regular day-to-day thing. It's a long-term relationship game. Definitely go hit up the investors, make sure they know who you are, keep them updated, but stay focused on what's not on Amanda's list, right? Like building your business, your concrete problem, as Mike said. Focus on that. Keep those investors updated. When it is time for them to put money in you, they will. But you can't hang your hat, or you can't plan on only succeeding if you get invested in, right? That is going to be the quickest path towards building a business that you don't want. I think with that, thank you so much, panelists, for the conversation thus far, and we'll open it up to questions. Sophie, if you see any good ones, they're all good.
Yeah, well, we already have one from Nikita on, we've got theory of change, and then we have one from Umil on video-based learning courses that he's doing that he wants to know KPIs founders will base their decisions on.
Yeah, let's start with the theory of change question. I've seen a lot of content out there on building your theory of change. Here's a template, here's a model, here's this whole process, there's a shorter process. Did any of you build a theory of change to sort of describe what that concrete problem you're solving is, what it is that you guys are about? Was it more of a mission vision sort of exercise? Did you find it valuable, or how else, if you didn't do something like that, how did you keep focus on your concrete problem and have it permeate through the organization?
Yeah, there's another way to approach than the very concrete version of theory of change. And as you get further into your product development, one of these templates can be very helpful, especially as you're trying to prove efficacy. I'd recommend working with, there are good partners out there. I just looking at participant lists, my friend Trisha Kalel is on from Digital Promise Group, who's been an amazing partner of Shmoop. We've used their research. They've helped us with researchers to prove efficacy. But in the early stages, that can be a very expensive, very time-consuming thing to do, even to spend the time to think about these outcomes. I always recommend outcome-based product roadmaps. But I would say in the early days, if you're trying to do something innovative, a better recommendation would actually be to create values around the product that it's trying to create. So don't focus as much on the outcomes yet. It's very early to say, I'm going to change attendance, or I'm going to change grading, or I'm going to change standardized testing. Focus on the values that your product's trying to create. As an example, when we started with the Shmoop Heartbeat, we said we're going to do a few things. We're going to make the tool a place of comfort and motivation for students. We're going to use non-normalized data in representations. We won't weaponize data when we give it back to educators. And there's a list of values we started with, which kept us in a very tight path where the outcomes will come regardless of what you guessed at the beginning of the process. So I'd say, depending on your maturity and where you're at, I'd recommend creating a value system for your product development first, and then worrying about the outcomes potentially after.
I have thought about theory of change quite a bit. I did as a teacher, and more recently, I think, especially in this last year, I mean, when everything closed last year, I think I definitely took a pause and just really tried to think about what's going to happen in the next decade. And I was trying to put that investor hat on for a second and just think how will schools change? How should they change? What might actually happen in practice? I was trying to kind of think about all those things. And then I think in the last few months, I've just thought a little bit more about my place in the entire thing. And that's sort of how I've kind of gotten to my own version of this. And this is just a personal thing that I did. I had to understand, if there's a lot of fires to put out in the world right now, too many. And so if I'm working on building a corporation in 2021, it better be a good one, that's sort of how I felt. And so I just had to fully understand that for me and for my team, what is it that we're doing? What is our place in a larger, a larger understanding of how a lot of problems need to change for students and for just people in general. And so that for me was just really kind of understanding that in our version, it was community, and it was my place in that is to connect people. And if I can do that, then there is change that will happen from that. I'm not going to necessarily, I'm not picking one thing, there's a lot for students, but if I can connect them, that changes the game for them. And so that's how I kind of approached it. And so don't tie yourself to any one specific template or anything. Feel free to toss them and just think about what are you doing, and how does if you get there, if it works, then what do things look like? How do things change after you? And I think that kind of helps to drive at least that like motivation, like when you get all those no's or when things get hard, like you kind of you dip back into that and you're like, no, this is worth it. I know why I'm here.
Really quickly, we use theory of change to drive sort of our policy longer term change work. We don't use it as a tool for our kind of, immediate entrepreneurial working.
Great, thanks. And one of the things we hear all the time, Sophie hears all the time from our community, is just help, when we're not asking for help on fundraising or what do we do about fundraising, we're hearing about go-to-market strategy and sales. Like, how do we really sort of not fix, but what are best practices here? And so this question sort of speaks to that, which is, when Urmil Bansali is asking, when he pitches his product, which is a video-based learning course to high schools, what will some of the KPIs that they will base their decision on? So what, how are your potential school partners or district partners making decisions on what they purchase and what they don't?
Yeah, I'm going to answer that question in hopefully a not too rude way, Urmil, but I'd say any information that me or Amanda or Mike or Sandro, or if any information we give you is not going to be very useful. What you need to do is you need to get to know those people who will be buying your product and get to know them deeply, inside and out. And so that not only do you know what KPIs they're responsible for, you know what they care about, what makes them laugh, what frustrates them about their job, what their best day feels like. And getting to do that's really, really challenging. You probably, don't have 50, I don't know if it's going to be guidance counselors or principals, in your personal network. But I think building that user empathy, like Mike was talking about earlier, for your buyer is so critical. So maybe that looks like going to conferences where they hang out, or finding the Facebook groups where they get together, or giving them $15 Amazon gift cards to do a 30-minute conversation with you where you ask them some research questions. But I think building that network as people as people who you trust, as people who give you really honest advice is so critical. I had a little shortcut. I was a tech director, and then I started, reaching out to tech directors. So I actually did have a good network. I'm not necessarily suggesting you go and, spend a few years as a high school guidance counselor, but maybe you can bring on a co-founder who has been in that role and has that network built in.
I'd also say your impact may be broad-based. I wouldn't focus your entire product development on moving a single KPI. That can get a little short-sighted, especially when you're talking about, what was your helping them choose their major. Yeah, there could be a bunch of things that would be measured. In your go-to-market motion, in your sales cycle, particularly if you're in a B2B type motion where you're selling straight to schools and districts, make sure your team or you or your fellow co-founders, whoever, are comfortable asking those questions, even if it's later in the deal cycle. You'll find that a lot of people are very open about that. Most districts also have some of the goals that they're trying to accomplish over a 3, 5, 7-year strategy plan right on their website. So there's a lot you can find there. But yeah, I think Dan's right on. It starts with empathy in the product build itself. And if you were truly empathetic, you'll probably be able to impact multiple outcomes depending on what that district or school may be trying to move at its time.
Thanks for the question. I mean, that's a really good one. And I'll just pick up on something that Dan said. One of the things that we found when we talk to entrepreneurs that have had some success in this area and selling to schools, usually there's something like that behind it, right? There's these smaller, more regional sort of conferences where you're striking up personal relationships with folks that might one day become your partners. And those are much easier to sponsor a breakfast table at, right, for a couple $100 rather than the multi-$1,000 sponsorships at bigger conferences. There are conferences, you would be surprised what kinds of conferences there are out there. I mean, there are conferences, I just saw one that happens in South Padre Island in Texas. It's about 80 administrators of elementary schools that are only interested in physical education. And heck, if they get to go to South Padre Island to hang out for this conference, all the better, right? It's not, depending on where you are, it's not far, it's a great place. Sponsorship, I think, was $200, and you get access to those 80 administrators that might be interested in your product. So look for those sorts of more smaller, more regional conferences where you can start to strike up those conversations. Ask for feedback on your solution. It works very well with investors as well. Ask for feedback on your pitch rather than directly asking for money. Create those longer term relationships so that when you're ready to have an ask, you have a much friendlier recipient. Let's see any other questions in here. But I will thank everybody on the panel for joining us for this. And we talk about this stuff all the time, but I'm glad to have a larger audience to share with. Thanks for your time. Thanks for the work that you do. Thank you, Sophie, for putting everything together and for creating such an awesome community for us.